I'm back. This video was inspired by a similar video made by a fellow cinephile and YouTuber friend of mine, Chris. His channel is called Mr. Nerdista, and he makes some great content, great videos analyzing films. I would highly recommend checking his channel out. I'm going to do my best to keep this video concise, but let's get right to it. I'm going to tell you why I love the art of filmmaking and why it's so dear to me. So my love for film can really best be described and explained through my love of literature. And in order to explain why I love film so much, I really have to discuss also my love for literature. As long as I can remember, I have always loved to read. My parents read to me nearly every night before I was old enough to read myself. And once I could read, I basically consumed books weekly. I still remember reading the Harry Potter books. As each one was released, I would pre-order it and immediately rush to Barnes & Noble to grab that new release in the saga, and I would pretty much have it done in a week. By the time I hit high school, and even right before high school, I had moved to novels of a more serious nature. They weren't really children's books anymore. I was delving into stuff like Stephen King and Dean Koontz and Dan Brown. But by the time I hit my freshman year of high school, freshman year was when everything changed in terms of literature and film. My freshman year of high school, I enrolled in an honors English course, and for the first essay assignment, we were given a list of something like 50 books, maybe not quite that many, and the one book that I chose among that list of books to analyze and write my first paper on was a book called A Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess. And yes, at 15 years old, I was able to analyze and write an essay on A Clockwork Orange. And if any of you know this book, then you might be a little surprised that a 15-year-old was analyzing a book of this nature. Nearly a decade later, I still consider it one of my favorite, if not my favorite novels. I'm forever grateful to Mrs. Palmer for putting that book on the list as an option to analyze, because I don't know if I would have the same passion for film that I have today had that book not been an option. So what does a paper that I wrote at the age of 15 have to do with my love for film? It has everything to do with it. A man named Stanley Kubrick adapted the novel to a film, and that the film was very controversial for a few reasons. First of all, it was faithful in keeping the very violent nature of the central character Alex and his gang. The film showed many scenes which at the time, and I think the year was 1971, early 70s, was considered very controversial. Kubrick also opted to greatly reduce the language that was used in the film by Alex and his gang, referred to as NADSAT, a combination of Russian and English slang. A language that, while reading the novel, required me to consult a printed out dictionary quite often. I was not familiar at all with this language. Lastly, Kubrick opted to leave out the final chapter, which changed the meaning of the novel and the film by eliminating this chapter from the film. I decided that this movie was worth seeing after doing all this research for the paper and reading the novel, and I remember renting it and being completely blown away at 15 by such a violent and visually striking film with such an incredibly strange world brought right off the paper to film. So up to that point in my life, I had really always loved movies. My parents and my extended family are all kind of movie nuts, at least quite a few of them. It's a very popular pastime for us. I grew up loving Star Wars, Jurassic Park, Indiana Jones, Gremlins, Goonies, Mrs. Doubtfire, basically everything from Disney, Sandlot, Pagemaster, I mean, the list goes on. Many family films and kid-friendly films. But I really hadn't experienced a film past the typical blockbuster films. And Stanley Kubrick and A Clockwork Orange was really how I finally branched out, and I began to voraciously read anything I could find on Stanley Kubrick. A couple years later, I received his A Life in Pictures box set as a Christmas gift, and because of his diverse filmography, I can accredit my love for all genres of film, no matter how obscure.
So as I go film by film for these different genres by Stanley Kubrick, I'm just going to describe a different scene that I love from each movie as to why I love Stanley Kubrick so much. And the brilliance of this scene right here, a very classic scene from this film, is the way Stanley Kubrick uses the camera with the axe. The axe stays in frame for the entire scene, even as she's in the bathroom with the camera. You watch as the axe continues to come through the door, and when he's outside the door, the camera moves with the axe into the door, and it is just a brilliant way to build tension and fear as you watch her face with the axe coming through the door, and then combine that with the incredible string instrument score, and of course, at the very end of this scene, we get the classic line from Jack Nicholson that I'll let you listen to.
Here's Johnny.
So this first clip from 2001: A Space Odyssey is pretty fantastic because it's one of the craziest jump cuts you've probably ever seen in a film, going from bone and savagery to spaceship and civilization in just a moment of seconds. And then the second clip that I really love is this clip right here. I'll just let you listen to it.
I'm afraid I can't do that.
What's the problem?
I think you know what the problem is just as well as I do.
What are you talking about, Hal?
This mission is too important for me to allow you to jeopardize it.
I don't know what you're talking about, Hal.
I know that you and Frank were planning to disconnect me, and I'm afraid that's something I cannot allow to happen.
Now, something I didn't know about this film until I read a book called Dispatches by an author named Michael Eyre was that this scene actually, part of it was seen by Michael Eyre while he was a correspondent in Vietnam, and Dispatches is his story while he was there, what he saw and witnessed. And what I like so much about this film is that Stanley Kubrick enlisted Michael Eyre, and it really gives a very raw and brutal look to the war, and it's not afraid to look it right in the face and show the most sadistic parts of it. And even from the American side, a lot of American war films show, the Americans as the good guys, whereas this film really is not scared to look away, or is not scared to look directly at what Americans did, what some of them did. And this scene near the end of the clip, famous quote from this scene, was actually a line that Michael Eyre wrote in the book Dispatches that he actually heard. Pretty sad, but I'll let you listen.
Why should we do a story about you? 'Cause I'm so fucking good. That ain't no shit neither. I've done got me 157 dead goops killed. And 51 of buffaloes too. Them are all certified. Any women or children? Sometimes. How can you shoot women and children? Easy. You just don't lead them so much. Ain't war hell?
While The Killing isn't necessarily one of my more favorite Stanley Kubrick films, it's nonetheless a film you cannot ignore as being one of the greatest crime neo-noir films ever made, especially for a film that in 1956, it was very early in his career, and Kubrick was low on funds and budgeting because he hadn't quite made a name for himself yet. It was really Paths of Glory and The Killing combined that kind of skyrocketed him, and then Spartacus into the international spotlight. But for what he had in terms of available for props and money and cast and crew, The Killing is still quite an achievement, and the music is quite iconic in this film, as well as the masks that they wear when they hold up the racetrack. But if you have never seen The Killing, I definitely recommend it, especially if you like crime and neo-noir type films. In my opinion, this film is hands down the most underrated film from Stanley Kubrick, his 12th and final film. So many people are quick to dismiss this film simply because of the erotic nature of it and the graphic sex and nudity. But the way he uses music, I know I keep saying music, but he was a master at using music in his films to build tension and to build a scene. Especially this film, I think the music in this film is used so incredibly well. And this scene in particular has always stuck with me. It's incredibly creepy, and the way he rotates the camera around the room, focusing on the silent staring mass, and the fact that you know Tom Cruise's character is just absolutely terrified as he looks around this room. It's a brilliant scene, and I think it is one of his better films, to be completely honest. But I absolutely love this film, and it is a great psychological thriller if you've not seen it. A Clockwork Orange is one of those films that's really hard to pinpoint with a genre. It's typically labeled as a dystopian crime film, but really it's one of those films that kind of fuels my love for the obscure and the artsy and something that you really can't put your finger on. You probably could have assumed that this was the scene I was going to pick for this film, because it is definitely the most iconic, one of, if not the most iconic scene from the entire film. But once again, I'm going to have to bring out music. Stanley Kubrick opts to use a lot of classical music throughout the entire film, and this really is a juxtaposition on the statement of violence within the film, and it's really violence for violence sake in many scenes, and then you have the classical music, which seems to represent a much higher class of society, a much more civilized society, that's always playing during some of the most violent scenes in the film. And that once again holds true here. And then the other brilliant part about this scene is how he holds Alex in the frame. Alex is always either above his fellow gang members in this scene, or he's at dead center, like when they're walking up the side of the lake here. He's dead center and in the front, always showing that he is in command, especially this scene right here. He is in command and he is in full control of these three men who consider themselves to be his friends and his fellow gang members, and it shows what kind of control he has over them. But this is definitely a brilliant scene from an absolutely brilliant film, and I love this movie. So obviously Stanley Kubrick has done 12 films, and I believe I did not show you 12 films in those last clips, but I unfortunately have not seen Barry Lyndon, Fear and Desire, or Lolita yet, and Dr. Strangelove and Spartacus I have not seen enough times to really give you any insight on a specific scene from those films, but I will work on it in the future, and maybe I will do some more videos about Stanley Kubrick.
I'm giving a very special shout out to Chris, Mr. Nerdista is his channel, who inspired me to make this video and share why I have fallen in love with film and why it's such a great passion of mine. So sorry about this awkward transition. My camera ran out of space, but real quick, definitely check out Chris's channel, and thank you for all the support. I appreciate it. Love all you guys, and don't forget to subscribe. Bye.